off this week focusing on the Vedas and ritual, and we're going to begin that discussion with a plunge into the examination of the Indus Valley civilization and the Vedas themselves. To examine the Indus River Valley civilization, we are essentially talking about two key elements: the larger civilization of Harappa, and very specifically the Mohenjo-Daro site. At the top right-hand side of the slide here, you're going to see a seal from the Harappa civilization, from the Indus River Valley civilization, and on the left-hand side of the slide, you will see another seal. Something to note here is that you can find glyph forms in both seals that are relatively similar, and these glyph forms therefore probably represent an early form of writing. However, we have not deciphered what this early form of writing is. The seals themselves were probably used to close documents and mark packaged goods. This suggests that the Indus River Valley civilization was part of an extensive long-distance trading network, and the animal on this seal on the top right was originally mistaken for a unicorn, but now it's thought to be a bull, probably similar to the oxen figure on the left-hand side of the slide, and then even these various glyph forms indicating horns and so forth. However, let's keep in mind that this writing system has not been deciphered. Why start here? Well, this early civilization in South Asia was in the Indus River Valley, so it's in the river valley that later Persian Farsi speakers would come to call Hindu, and it's on India's western coast in one of the earliest civilizations and archaeological finds in the world. The Indus civilization produced writing, built large cities, and controlled food production through what we think was probably some type of social structure that resembled a central government. Unlike Egypt and the Mesopotamian, however, the Indus civilization was not dominated, as far as we can tell, by powerful religious elites. We just don't have the evidence to suggest that quite yet. However, and we also don't have massive temple structures that we can look at, or even religious structures venerating aspects of the afterlife, like pyramids, for example. Deforestation and climate change and a series of invasions all probably contributed to the decline of the Indus civilization in around 1500 BCE. Now keep that date in mind, 1500 BCE. Mohenjo-Daro, which is pictured here, meaning mound of dead men in Urdu, is an archaeological site in the province of Sindh in Pakistan that was built around 2500 BCE and is one of the largest settlements of the ancient Indus Valley civilization and one of the world's earliest major cities, contemporaneous with those civilizations of Egypt, Mesopotamia, Minoan Crete, and Norte Chico in the Americas. Mohenjo-Daro was abandoned in the 19th century BCE as the decline of the Indus Valley civilization was beginning, and the site was not rediscovered until the 1920s, although it was probably known to locals for some time, perhaps before that. Significant excavation has been conducted at the site of the city, which was designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1980. The site is currently threatened by erosion and improper restoration, however. Now, the seal from the Indus Valley civilization on the upper left-hand side can be found in Delhi, and this seal is known as the Pashupati seal. It's a seal that was discovered at the Mohenjo-Daro archaeological site, and the seal depicts a figure that is possibly tricephalic, meaning that it has 3 heads. It appears to be seated in a meditation pose upon a platform with some type of animals down below and animals above. You could see perhaps what might be a tiger-like figure on the right-hand side, maybe elephant above that, a rhinoceros over there towards the left, and then ox or water buffalo towards the left just below the rhinoceros. It was once thought to be ithphalic, an interpretation that is now mostly discarded, and the individual has a horned headdress and is surrounded by these animals, however, which has been interpreted to suggest that it might be a horned deity or some type of deity. Now, importantly, the term Pashupati actually means the Lord of Animals and is a name from Shiva. It's one of Shiva's names, a later epithet of Shiva that's been applied backward to this seal. But since we can't actually read the seal itself, we don't know what to actually call this figure. Well, one of the questions becomes, well, why is this figure so significant? Well, it looks an awful lot like some later representations of Shiva and the Lord of the Animals that come up. So that's why it's significant. We're going to turn the page here toward the Vedas, so to speak. The Vedas are a large body of religious texts composed in Vedic Sanskrit, and the texts constitute the oldest layer of Sanskrit literature and the oldest scriptures of what is now Hinduism. They are South Asian texts, but importantly, keep in mind, they don't actually use the term Hindu anywhere in the texts. There are 4 Vedas, the Rigveda, the Yajurveda, the Samaveda, and the Atharva Veda. Each Veda has 4 subdivisions, the Samhitas. These are mantras, what you might consider in other contexts benedictions, but mantras is a better term, sort of repetitive prayers and meditative verses. They also include the Aranyakas, which are texts on rituals, ceremonies, sacrifices, and symbolic sacrifices, as well as the Brahmanas, which are commentaries on rituals, ceremonies, and sacrifices, and the Upanishads, which include some texts on meditation, philosophy, and spiritual knowledge. Some scholars add a 5th category, the Upasanas, or the worship texts. These texts of the Upanishads are sometimes considered part of the Vedas, sometimes not. And they're ideas that discuss things akin to Sramana traditions and heteropraxic ideas. Vedas are Shruti texts or Shruti texts. They are what is heard. They're very different from other religious texts, which are called Smrti, which is what is remembered. So there's a very distinctly oral nature to both of these, but these ones are what is heard, what is told and listened to. Hindus consider the Vedas to be not necessarily of man. They are superhuman. They are impersonal. They are authorless. They are revelations of sacred sounds and texts heard by ancient sages after intense meditation. The Vedas themselves have been orally transmitted from the 2nd millennium before the Common Era, and with help of elaborate mnemonic devices have been memorized and passed down since. The mantras or the mantras contained within are the oldest part of the Vedas. They are recited in the modern age for their phonology rather than the semantics. They are considered to be primordial rhythms of creation. In other words, the oral nature itself is important for metaphysics and the process of creation. By reciting them, the cosmos is regenerated. So by reciting the Vedas, one plays a ritual role in the recreation of the cosmos by enlivening and and nourishing the forms of creation in the past. The various forms of Hindu philosophy and also South Asian philosophy more broadly have taken different positions on the Vedas. There are certain schools of South Asian philosophy which acknowledge the primal authenticity and authority of the Vedas, and these are classified as Astika schools. There are other Shramana traditions, such as Lokayata, Charvaka, Ajivika, Buddhism, Jainism, which did not regard the Vedas as authorities, and these are referred to as Nastika schools. So keep in mind here that the Vedas themselves are not guiding belief here. It's a guide of certain types of ritual practice. And so when we're using Nastika and Astika here, we're really talking about heteropraxic and also orthopraxic distinctions. I'm going to spend too much time on diving into all the details about all of the Vedas because that would just take the whole semester away from us. But I do want to highlight some of the issues regarding the Rigveda, just so you can get a sample of some of the issues involved with the Vedic texts. The Rigveda is the oldest known Vedic Sanskrit text. Its early layers are one of the oldest known extant texts in any Indo-European language. The sounds and texts of the Rigveda have been orally transmitted from the 2nd millennium before the Common Era. So if you think about that Harappa and Indus River Valley civilization, this is emerging during the decline of that Indus Valley civilization. The philological and linguistic evidence indicates that the bulk of the Rigveda Samhita, the core text, was composed in the northwestern region of the South Asian subcontinent, most likely between 1500 and 1000 BCE. So again, remember that decline date of Mohenjo-Daro being 2500, and then the Indus River Valley civilization more broadly being about 1500. We're talking about the successor society. We're not sure if it was made up of similar peoples or even related peoples or even similar languages or even related languages. Just happens to be in kind of the same place and a little bit further southern and a little bit further eastern. We should note that there is a wider approximation of the Rigveda texts around 1700 to 1000 BCE that has also been given by numerous expert scholars. The Rigveda is layered, consisting of Samhita, Brahmanas, Aranyakas, and Upanishad texts. The Rigveda Samhita is the core text, as I mentioned, and in this core text you have a series of different books, hymns, and verses. The Rigveda Samhita contains 10 mandalas, or 10 books. This is a different usage from the term mandala than you might be familiar with from Buddhist contexts, or even just being familiar with the art of the mandala figure from tattoos or something like that. In this case, the mandalas are books of the Rigveda. Within these 10 books, within these 10 mandalas, you have 1028 suktas. These are hymns. And within those hymns, you have about 10,600 verses. So in the 8 books, books 2 through 9, that were composed at the earliest period, we think, these hymns predominantly discuss cosmology and praise deities. The more recent books, those books that set up the framing, books 1 and 10, in part also deal with philosophical or speculative questions. They deal with virtues such as dana, or charity in society, questions about the origin of the universe and the nature of the divine or divinities, as well as other metaphysical issues in their hymns, in their mantra structures. the discussion questions for this activity, I'd like to open it up with 3 distinct threads. If you see somebody who has already replied to question 1, reply directly to them. Go to their answer, hit reply, and then add your contribution. This way we should get 3 really distinct threads to address these questions. The first thread should be, why even bother addressing the Harappa civilization? The second, are the Vedas Hindu? Are they Proto-Hinduism? Should we use another term, like Vedic religion? This is a why or why not question. The third question, in the case of the Rigveda, go ahead and go back to that map where you saw different sites. Is it safe to create geographical reconstruction of sites mentioned in the text? Why or why not? And you should be able to consider both points here. You should be able to consider why it might be an interesting idea or why it might not be so safe. Okay, go ahead and make your posts and let's get the discussions going.